Hey, gang, welcome to the Friday Happy Hour Webcast from WhiskyCast. I'm Mark Gillespie in the WhiskyCast studio in the charming yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. The dog has been sent outside to play. If you happened to catch our Twitter tease about half an hour or so ago, Bader was down here with me, had packing peanuts and everything all over the place, and I got to keep him out of the bottles because that dog is going to be a whiskey sniffer. I just have a sneaking suspicion about it. Hope you had a great week so far. It's time to celebrate the weekend. Pour yourselves a dram. I have some Uncle Nearest 1856 because, we have as our guests today the force of nature herself, Fawn Weaver, the founder of Uncle Nearest. Hurricane Fawn is with us, and Victoria Eady-Butler, the master blender and the current Icons of Whiskey America Master Distiller / Blender of the Year. Well done, Victoria. How you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing about as great as I could be on a Friday afternoon. Fawn, you keeping busy?
I keep a full schedule. I always say people that say they're busy look like they're running around with like chickens with their heads cut off. So I keep a full schedule.
I know that feeling. Folks, if you have comments or questions, go ahead and put them in the chat sections on whichever platform you're on, unless you're watching on Twitter, because, well, we won't see those till afterwards. But we're already starting to get a lot of comments coming in, and just folks looking forward to this discussion. Victoria, I got to ask, what did you think when you heard about the Icons Award a couple of weeks ago?
I say all the time, in my previous life, I thought I was kind of hard. March of 2019 changed my whole life. And now I am in the category of being a softie, a crybaby. So once Fawn shared that news with me, there were tears of joy, no doubt about it.
And what did you think? Because you've only been doing this for a couple of years, and there's a lot of folks out there that you beat out for this honor.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big deal given that I have only been doing it for a couple of years. So I'm extremely honored. I was totally surprised, but extremely honored.
Fawn, what did you think when you saw the awards? Because I got to admit, I was not watching, and which was to my own surprise was I should have probably been watching, but I was not watching. But what did you think when you saw Victoria's name come up on the screen?
Well, I was so excited because I remember the very first time that I was in the tasting room with Victoria, and the way that this was supposed to work. And V, I don't know if you remember this, but Victoria was not supposed to be blending all of the 1884. We had this idea that all of Nearest's descendants, starting with the eldest, that each one would, this bottle here, the 1884, that this signature on the back of it, each one would be a different descendant of Nearest Green. So Victoria and I had already chosen descendant number 2, and she was already ready to go. And then Victoria blended 1884, and I watched her. Now, I don't know how you and Fred Minnick and all the way that you guys taste and spit out, and I am awful with that. I taste and I drink. I'm just not the spitting out kind when it's really whiskey. And so we sat in that tasting room, and I was, drinking it, and Victoria was doing what she's supposed to do, which was swishing it around and getting everything and spitting it out. And so I watched her that first time. And number one, she created an amazing blend that first time out. And it was so good that I immediately said, okay, I know Lisa's coming next. It was Melissa, right? That was coming next, V. Right. And I said, I know Lisa's coming next, but let's push her back and let's do another one with you. And she did the next one, and it was so much better than the first. And I said, okay, we've got to keep going with this, because if each of your blends get better, this 1884 is going to very quickly surpass 1856. And so we just kept going, and it became really clear. And I think I said it to you maybe the third time, V, that I truly believe that whiskey was just in her blood, because the way that she was able to do it, I could not have done. the way that she was able to pull different notes out. I mean, I laugh with Fred because he loves marzipan, and I'm yet to taste marzipan in anything, including Uncle Nearest. So I can tell you if something is really good or if something is off, but I can't get in there and really know those notes. And Victoria can. And so I was actually really impressed with how she was able to do that and how she picked that up quickly with zero training. Talk about being thrown in on the deep end. And so once she did that, I said, this is a no-brainer. You can do this better than anyone that I had met. And so I was excited, but I also believe she deserved it because I watched how she did this. And to be self-taught, I think it's just phenomenal.
Oh, it's amazing. And Victoria, I want you to tell us about your background before you connected with Fawn, because this is going to shock some folks. I mean, if you're self-taught as a blender and you didn't work in whiskey until you went into that blending room for the first time.
Right. So my background, my previous life, I was in law enforcement, for 30 years until March of 2019. So I always enjoyed whiskey, even enjoyed making cocktails, but I never even considered blending whiskey, curating whiskey, even being on a whiskey team. So when Fawn asked me to curate the first batch, naturally I was nervous. I was nervous about it, but she put so much confidence in me that it really did set me up for success. And so I have to give credit where credit is due, knowing that Fawn had put so much confidence in me, especially after the first batch, going into the second batch. I couldn't help but do well.
Well, I have to say though, Victoria, because Mark, I call her Queen V. The whole company calls her Queen V, but Queen V is downplaying what she did before with the Department of Justice, and I actually think, ironically, because her job as it wasn't an analyst, you oversaw the analyst, right, V?
Right.
So at overseeing the analyst, like her whole job was, her whole job was in the details. Yeah. Her whole job was in looking for every little speck, right? That is, and so I think that she transferred that into what she's doing now, where she's literally pulling out all of the details in the whiskey.
Attention to detail is what really matters, both in law enforcement work and in whiskey blending.
It mattered then, and it definitely matters now.
So tell us how you put together a blend, V.
Oh my! So now that I'm into doing it all the time, I have a routine. Regardless of what time of day that I go in to do a blend, I don't eat before. I don't have any food, and now I do not drink any water in between each sample. And so for me, I know some might think that doesn't matter, but for me it does. And so I go into the tasting room with nothing on my stomach, and I don't drink any water. I take my time to do it, and it works for me. And I don't drink anything but Uncle Nearest. So I'm very protective of my palate. Again, others may think, well, you can drink what you want to. It's not going to affect it. Well, now that I'm doing it, I got to rock what I know. And this is working for me. It is working for our team. So that's it. My preparation always, I meditate every day. And I do that even on the day that I'm blending. And I don't put anything on my stomach. I don't drink any water in between each sample. And I keep my palate protected with Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey.
Now, wait a second, because if I start drinking whiskey and I haven't had any food in my stomach at all during the day, and I'm not drinking any water, let's just say it doesn't end real well. That's when I start getting the call from the upstairs going, what the hell are you doing down there?
Well, it works for me, and it ends well every time.
Because you got a driver to get you home, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't get drunk. I don't get drunk, Mark.
Okay.
I just don't. Now, if I'm out having a good time, I still don't get drunk, but I never get drunk at work. So when I am blending whiskey, I'm at work. And so I don't get drunk.
But still, at some point, but you got to be careful. I mean, even driving home after sampling whiskeys, if you were to get pulled over,
for sure,
that would still, you'd still be in trouble.
For sure.
Well, she's not sampling and then getting in the car, though.
No, that's what I mean. You get somebody driving her home from the tasting room.
No, I mean, you're usually when she's sampling, it's early in the morning. So it's well worn off before she's ever getting back in the car.
Absolutely. And when you're sampling, Mark, it's not like you're drinking a full glass of whiskey. You are literally sampling. So it's not like sitting back and having a casual cocktail or a dram of whiskey. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit different from that.
Oh, yeah. And we had a question for you from, let's see here, from Nurse Dave's Shaving World. What do you lower the proof to when you are blending, or do you add water to the samples, or do you take them neat?
We take it neat. I don't add any water. It comes out barrel proof. And so when I'm blending, I do all the tasting without adding any water. And of course, be mindful that we put very little water in our whiskey anyway.
That is amazing, because I hear the guys in Scotland, when I talk with them, they knock it down to 20% ABV, because they're looking for the aromas and they're looking for the faults in a cask. And I mean, if I'm looking at the way you do this, the cynic in me would say, she's doing it all wrong, but the whiskey is so good that I can't criticize it, because, I mean, it works. And I'm going, wait a second, maybe these guys are all wrong and Victoria's got it right.
It works. And and we follow what, close as we can to what Nears did back in the day when he was putting whiskey in a barrel. He proofed down, and so we do the same thing.
And JC Clapsaddle says, Victoria drinks whiskey for breakfast and drinks it neat. I like her style. Amen. Tabitha Spirit Bomb, I really don't get the watering down and sampling. I know Dr. Bill doesn't water it down either. Chris Ratcliffe said, go ahead.
I never understood that. I remember the first time we were doing a tasting where someone watered it down to look for the imperfections. And my challenge with that is you've now added an element that is not going to be in your final product, right? Because the water that you're proofing it down to, they bring it in and they'll use distilled water and all these different things. But now you've added something that actually isn't going in your bottle. And so I never understood this concept of bringing it down to 40 proof. I only tried it once or twice. And from that point forward, I said, listen, to me, I need to have it at full proof. But remember, our whiskey isn't coming out of the barrels at 130 and 140. So I think that's something to also remember. We're intentionally only aging it in single story rick houses so that it is being proofed down versus going up, right? And so most of our barrels, when we're releasing the whiskey, it's anywhere between 99 and 105. So that, and usually it's somewhere around anywhere between 101 and 103 is the majority of the barrels as they're being released. And so it's not quite the same as some that are doing it full proof where it just kind of knocks you on your ass. That's not what this is. It is so close to what the final proof will be that I think that may be to a certain extent, a part of her secret sauce is that what she's tasting is so close to what will be in the bottle that consumers are receiving that I think that there could be some type of through line with that.
Question for you and a comment from our pal Tash McGill down in New Zealand, who will be on the podcast this weekend. Just further evidence that we don't always have to follow the traditional methods, and there is opportunity for discovery and experimentation. And she wants to know, Victoria, have you been able to teach others your techniques? Now, when this pandemic's over and I can get down to Tennessee again, I want to spend some time in the lab with you. I want to see this.
Come on. We can do that.
Definitely.
But no, I haven't taught others. Of course, since last March, we have been basically quarantined. I don't see Fawn that often. And so, no, I haven't taught others. Maybe at some point there will be opportunities for that, but not thus far.
She'll need to teach me because I'm still not very good at sampling. I can tell you if it's good or if it needs to go back in the barrel or stay in the barrel. That's about all I can tell you.
And Dave Champel says some whiskey falls apart with any whiskey, and I think he meant to say water. Some opens up better. So we'll let that one slide. And Ed Stannard says he was trying to decide what to buy today. Now he knows. So I think we sold at least one bottle of Uncle Nearest.
Good deal.
Now, the question I have, since we talked about you not being able to see each other, how are you guys getting by with the pandemic, and how are things going down in Tennessee with everything that's been going on?
Oh, wow. I'll let Fawn go first.
Well, we're incredibly fortunate that we had opened our distillery to the public. We had opened phase 1 of it, but we had not opened the main phase 2. And so we had been open on the weekends and doing tours, but during the week completely closed and just for construction. And so every Friday night, the construction crews literally had to clean up so much in order to allow for guests to come the following day. And so what we did once we shut down the distillery, it actually made it easier for us to finish up phase 2. So when we reopen in June, we're reopening with the majority of the distillery operational. And I'm super excited about that. So I'm always that person who's looking for what's the good that came out of this, what's the benefit that came out of that. And that's one of them. And for us, it absolutely didn't slow down our sales. Our sales, we were never reliant upon our tasting room for sales. Our sales in the marketplace have continued to grow triple digits every single quarter. I think we're now in our 10th quarter in a row of triple digit gains over same time last year. So we haven't had any disruption from the pandemic in that regard. And
no disruption in supply from your distillery that you're working with in Tennessee right now.
I mean, if you ask the consumers, they'll say we're always out of stock. Well, that's because they keep buying it all. We literally can't keep up. We have a second shift going. We bottle up 2,000 cases a day, and it's still not enough. And so it is what it is. We're trying to keep up. But yeah, on any given day, you never really know because those who are working in the distillery, of course, they're getting temperature checked every single day to come in. Well, if someone's temperature is high, they've got to go home. So we never know who's on the bottling line. Every day is a box of chocolates as to how many people are going to be on the first shift, how many people are going to be on the second shift. And then, like, for instance, yesterday, we got really nervous because the person who comes in and really does all of the dumping and does our color match and all the rest of that stuff, making sure that we're pulling enough from 14-year-old or 8-year-old or 11-year-old to get the right color, the right body. And then, so we had a little bit of a scare because he had a cold. But now when someone has a cold, you don't know what that really is. And his temperature check was fine, but he had to go and go get tested. And our first thought was, oh man, this is going to adjust things for a couple of weeks if he has COVID. So we were very fortunate he didn't. So everything was fine and everything continued on. But the freight trucks have been brutal because the different storms have been altering things. And so every day we have the distributors coming, but we don't know whether or not their trucks are going to show up and if we need to move stuff around. So yeah, every day is a box of chocolates in that regard. But in terms of what's happening on the sales side, consumer wise, we're doing incredibly well.
And are you still selling or sending out masks? Because I know you were doing that a year
every day.
ago.
Every day, believe it or not, it's interesting because at one point it had really gone down where we were only getting a few requests a day. But then it went right back up once we started seeing the surge. So our requests en masse, generally, it goes with the ebb and flow of how the pandemic is going. So right now we're seeing cases go down. We have less requests for them, but we'll see. I mean, Olivia sends out mass every single day.
Yeah, I was actually surprised. When I talked to Olivia on Tuesday, I think it was, and I asked her how her day was going, and she was just frantic because she had a whole lot of requests that day, and I didn't realize that we were still getting as many.
Oh yeah.
And so she was really busy sending out masks. I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday of this week. So yeah, we're still rocking and rolling with that.
And just to explain, you were doing this for first responders and healthcare workers who were having shortages. Mm-hmm. Somebody made the comment earlier that we have apparently a bunch of law enforcement folks that on YouTube that are watching. If somebody still needs masks and they're having trouble getting them, how can they request them?
Oh, absolutely. So they can send it. I think the easiest way, because people know how to spell my name, is just send it to my first name last name at unclenearest.com, and then I'll get it to the right place. But some of the first masks that we ever sent out were actually to the NYPD, to the FBI anti-terrorism unit, to the LAPD, to the Navy. Those were the first requests that we got. And it was actually pretty surprising to me because we put up the invitation for those who are in our whiskey family, those who follow us online, support us. We put up, listen, we have been buying N95s while everyone's been arguing about price, because we believe that no matter if they're price gouging or not, meaning the manufacturers, the lives that they will save are more important. So we'll deal with that later. And so I had purchased the N95 mask for my own team. This was before there were any shortages. This is before anyone was even acknowledging on the government side that we needed masks. This was back, I mean, you're going back pretty far where the government was saying we did not need to wear masks. And I remember, V will remember this. I want to say it was like March 1st. I went on to our Facebook, our internal group page for our team, and I said, y'all, I'm calling bullshit. You all have N95s that are coming in the mail to you for you and your family. Please do not grocery shop without them. Please do not go out without them. And the government will catch up and they'll figure out that we need these. But for now, I'm going to protect you. And because I think because we were ahead of a lot of people that were actually buying the masks, that when the rush came and it created the shortage, we already had the relationship with the manufacturers and the suppliers. And so we were able to continue getting them, and at the higher prices. But again, when you have all of these nurses and doctors and firefighters and cops that are all supporters of Uncle Nearest, that have been with us from day one, I wasn't going to allow for these people to be going into work every day to protect us and to be unprotected. And so we paid a little bit more for those masks than I think they were worth. But I would venture to say that we called it Operation Brothers Keeper. And I would venture to say that our Operation Brothers Keeper saved some lives. And so for that, I think every penny was worth it.
Absolutely.
Oh, amen to that. And cheers to you guys for doing that, because I think you did save lives. Whether you know it or not, whether we can document it, I think you probably did save a few lives.
I hope so.
And I think you deserve the credit for it.
Thank you.
I am particularly honored to be a part of a team that is concerned about our community. Yes, we make whiskey, and yes, we sell whiskey, but we are very concerned about the communities in which we live and which we sell whiskey. So, and I say it all the time now, and I hope that it doesn't become a cliche. I mean it wholeheartedly when I say that, we're not chasing dollars. We're building history. And a part of that has to be concerned about the folks who are drinking your product. So we're always concerned about that.
That's why I love talking to you guys so much, because you get it. There is more to life than selling whiskey. You can have whiskey
Absolutely.
and sell it, and you can make money doing it, and you can have a lot of fun writing and talking about it. But if you don't focus on the community,
Yeah.
that's you lose something in all that. On that note, Fawn, give us an update on the Nearest and Jack Advancement Initiative. I know Tracy's working through the program, but we haven't talked about this in a few months. Where do you guys stand on that?
Tracy is phenomenal. So now she's over at, I don't know if you know, she's over at Sagamore, and she has been working with their team for about the last week. I want to say this is maybe her third or fourth distillery that she is apprenticing at during this, but she's one. And then Byron Copeland is down at Jack Daniel Distillery. So he has been working there, and I like keeping up with him on social media because he posts all of his little things of what he's doing. So it's been fun. It's time for us to choose another apprentice. And so we've all been talking about that. Matt Blevins, who heads up all of the global brand for Jack Daniels, was at my house last week for coffee. And we were talking about, okay, who's the next brand in the business incubation program, which is essentially us coming alongside Black-owned spirit brands and lifting them up, sort of pulling as we climb, if you would. And so we were looking at that and saying, okay, here are the next two that we think are good for the program, and who's the next apprentice, and how do we bring the distributors in? Because if I would venture to say that the whitest, most male part of our industry is not actually the supplier, it's the distributors. And so so many of our team members, especially on the side, the sales side, is coming from the distributor. And so if the pathway into the supplier side of the business, to the Uncle Nearest and the Diageos and everyone else, if the natural sort of route that people go is from being a bartender to then working for the distributor to then working to the supplier, well, if the distributors are white male, and that's, predominantly across the board, well, then we've got a bit of a problem we need to sort out. And so that has become a conversation as of late. How do we bring them into the Nearest and Jack Advancement Initiative to figure out how can we help to diversify that third tier, right? Well, I guess they're the second tier, but it's still a part of our 3-tier system. How do we do that? And so the Nearest and Jack Advancement Initiative, I would venture to say, of all of the programs that I have seen so far come out of the industry, we're the first one to really get our hands dirty, right? We didn't just turn it over and say, okay, we're writing a check to this organization and this organization. Yeah, of course we did that too, but we literally rolling up our sleeves on any given day. I am on the phone with at least one Black-owned spirit, one Black spirit brand owner. Yesterday I had 2, and we're walking through everything from marketing, branding, trademark, business plans, capital raises, valuations, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, one yesterday I was like, listen, I don't know what the TTB did in terms of telling you to put this on your label that this has natural flavors, but you didn't add anything. So get it off. And then putting them with the people because they didn't understand it was a vodka that is being made from sweet beets. So it creates this aroma that reminds you of gin. And on the front end, it really does remind you of having botanicals. On the back end, it still tastes like vodka, in my opinion. But on the front end, it has those botanicals. And the TTB just didn't understand it. And so they said, well, if you put this all natural flavor on there. And so those are the things that someone coming in the industry doesn't necessarily know. You can tell a TTB no, and fight for why it should not be on that bottle. And so these are the kind of things that we've learned. And so we're able to save them a lot of time, money, and heartache. But also we have essentially opened our Rolodex, giving them direct contact to the heads of Reserve Bar and Mini Bar and Drizzly and Total Wine and Specs and all the rest of these guys who they really need in order to be able to build their brand. So
and you've got my phone number, give them my number too.
Yeah.
Give them my number too, because if they're making whiskey, I want to talk to them.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, hell yes.
Okay. All right.
Because one entrepreneur, Black spirits entrepreneur, I'm assuming you know and you've talked with Jackie Summers, right?
Of course.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that Sorrell's on the radar because he was one of the pioneers, and I know that brand could use some love and get some distribution out around the country.
Well, so Jackie has my direct contact. Here's the thing: is I will.
Oh hell, I don't even have that.
I will not pursue, but I will not pursue because there are so many brands who need it and want our help. And so for me, it's those who are reaching in and everyone. So Jackie has a lot of help from a lot of different people, right? And so he may not feel as though he needs this particular program, but several, and we don't stick to just whiskey. I mean, some of my favorite in the program are actually not whiskey. You should have on Duke and Dane. Their salted caramel whiskey, I think, is pretty cool, and they're one of the ones that we're helping. But yeah, I haven't heard from Jackie in terms of a request to help with Sorrel, but I do communicate with him otherwise.
Well, because he may not ask. He's proud. He's not going to ask for help, but
listen,
you know what I mean. He can.
That cannot be you.
I know.
You cannot be proud in this industry. You have to be able to ask for help if you need help. And there are so many that I get that reach into me because I'm so active on social media. I get DM'd every single day from people coming into the industry, people in the industry, people wanting to return to the industry, and it didn't work out. And so I have so much incoming that's really all I have the ability. That's all I have the bandwidth for, is all the incoming.
Yeah. And speaking of that, we should note that Jamie Foxx just got into the industry. He just bought brown sugar bourbon.
Yeah. So Jamie, it's really funny because if I remember correctly, the plan for that was originally Rihanna. If I remember correctly, when I first heard about brown sugar bourbon a couple of years ago, but it was being tied there. So when I saw that pop up and Jamie bought it, I was like, well, talk about full circle. He came in and Jamie is known for his legendary parties. He's just a great guy, like a legitimately great guy. And so this is an industry that has really wonderful people in it. And so I'm looking forward to seeing him in it. My hope is that he's really in it and he's not just a brand ambassador. I'll find out soon enough.
I hear he spends money, and if he spends money, he's not a brand ambassador. If he's putting up his own money.
Yep. That's the question.
And we should explain that. I mean, you have these connections because you spent a lot of time in Hollywood. Your husband's an executive with Sony, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah.
So you have the ties in Hollywood as well as within whiskey. So that's where you would have some of these connections.
Yeah, he has connections. We also have quite a few investors that are, even though we don't plaster them because they're not brand ambassadors for us more than they just, when they're out, they're always ordering Uncle Nearest and they post about it and things like that, but we don't request it. We don't hire brand ambassadors. So whenever you see a celebrity posting about Uncle Nearest, there's a very good chance they're actually an investor in the brand. But because we wanted to make sure that the focus was on Nearest Green and it doesn't get distracted, then we don't bring in celebrities that will seem like ambassadors, if that makes sense, because then the conversation becomes about them versus the conversation about Nearest. But we have quite a few celebrities that are invested in our brand.
And one of those would be Jeffrey Wright, who did the film for Uncle Nearest.
He was just texting me from London because he's wrapping up Batman. And he's like, I want to give 1820 as gifts. Do we have any? And I said, funny enough, we just bottled a barrel. So, and they're wrapping up, I think next week. He's like, can I get it for my castmates? He is, talk about just a solid human being. He's a really good guy. Now his worldview sometimes clashes with a lot of people because his worldview is from having been raised by people who were direct descendants of enslaved people, but meaning they were alive, right? So I think for many of us African Americans, we're several generations removed from knowing someone who was, like, personally knowing someone who was enslaved. But then you have some people, like even Nearest's granddaughter, who was still alive in 106 when I interviewed her. She passed away at 108. You still have a lot of people who are directly connected to people who were enslaved or were the children of those who were enslaved. And so their worldview is going to be quite different and can come across as more militant but I respect it because I understand their proximity to slavery itself.
Right.
Oh, yeah. And Victoria, let's explain your connection to Nearest Green, because I'm trying to remember, is it great-great-granddaughter or great-great-great-granddaughter?
Great-great-granddaughter.
Okay, two greats.
Yes, two greats.
Okay.
Nearest's granddaughter is my grandmother.
What did you hear about him growing up? I know we talked about this back in Seattle last year, about this time a year ago. But what did you hear about him growing up?
Well, my grandmother always shared that Nearest taught Jack how to distill. Those were her words, or how to make whiskey. Those were her words. So she always shared with the family and with anyone else who dropped by. My grandmother's house is in town of Lynchburg, right downtown, right just blocks away from downtown. So my grandmother was a fantastic cook. And so oftentimes you would find people there at her house. And always on Sunday, the family came home and other townspeople would sit on my grandmother's porch. And so she always shared that Nearest, her grandfather taught Jack Daniel how to make whiskey. Those were the words she used.
Well, and she used to cook for all the people at the distillery.
She did.
So they would walk from the distillery to her house and sit on the front porch, and all the town gossip would happen on Mammy's front porch.
I do not know how in the world they continued working after a full meal like meatloaf, pinto beans, fried corn, cornbread. You know, it was that kind of meal. And that they called it dinner time. It was breakfast, dinner, and supper. And she cooked a big dinner meal for of course, my grandfather and two of her sons who worked at Jack Daniel, and then their friends as well. You know, people would come, as Fawn would say, would come to the house for dinner.
At noon.
At noon. At noon. And they had to be back at work at 12:30.
Right, because dinner and then supper was what you ate in the evening, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
We have a comment from Nurse Dave. I'm not an American whiskey guy, but I see Uncle Nearest is in stock locally. I'll give it a shot to support y'all. And we've had a lot of comments on that one. And Chris Ratcliffe asks, do you have any data on Uncle Nearest drinkers? Are you reaching consumers outside of the usual whiskey drinking market? Are you bringing new folks in?
Yeah, so it's it's so wild because I was literally just looking at some stats which were pretty astounding in terms of our buyers over the fourth quarter. Now the numbers over the entire year is different, but we were specifically looking at the fourth quarter, and you would not believe that the number of women who purchased was on reserve bars specifically was over 70%. Now, granted, many of those were gifts for their husbands, but our normal consumer is 50-50 men and women. And our normal consumer in terms of, so that the whiskey buyer overall is 70%, 72.4% white is the American whiskey buyer. With Uncle Nearest, that number is more like 50-50. We do have quite a few people from every spectrum that purchase, but we're about 50-50 between white and minority.
I think anything that brings more people in to the whiskey market is a great success, and
yes,
more power to you on that.
Cognac a little bit, I think.
And Chris Ratcliffe, so appreciative to you, Fawn, for reaching out to the British Bourbon Society. You mentioned Jeffrey's in London right now, bringing Uncle Nearest to American whiskey fans over in Europe and building that relationship. How are the export sales going for you, given the tariffs that are still in play on American whiskey?
Yeah, so what we actually did is we chose not to do very much more on the international front until they get the tariffs resolved. And so we haven't pulled anything out, but we also haven't focused on it at all. British Bourbon Society, the thing that was so wonderful about them is we didn't have a single barrel program. And I was in London and I was having brunch with one of the founders of the British Bourbon Society. And he's the one who actually suggested the single barrel. And so the reason why their bottle, I actually have one back there on the top right. It has, you can't see it. The camera's not looking at it. But their bottle actually has their logo at the top instead of the house that we have on all of our bottles. And it was really special because at the time, we were still trying to be accepted in America, whether it was the story or the brand or the fact that our juice is sourced. I mean, we don't have anything in our bottles below 7 years old. And so initially people were pushing back on that until they realized our juice doesn't taste like anyone else's out there. So it's not about where you start, it's about where you end and what you do with both your filtration process, how you age it, where you proof it, how you release it from the barrel, when you release it from the barrel, there are so many different things that impact what that final flavor is in the bottle. And Uncle Near's didn't taste like anything else. And people knew that. But the first ones to get that was the British Bourbon Society. And those over the pond, they immediately got it. And then they began influencing those here. So it was interesting because New York took a while to bring us in. I mean, a while in our terms. We went from 1 state to 50 states in less than 2 years. So that's not a while for, normal independent, but for us, that was a while. And New York was one of the last ones to come in. And I remember the distributor in New York, the reason why they really began looking at Uncle Near's is because they were getting so many people in from London saying, how do you guys not have Uncle Near's? We have Uncle Near's. How do you not have Uncle Near's? And so that we owe a lot to the UK and specifically to Britain for helping us in even certain markets here in our own country.
Oh, yeah. Ed Standard, why is it just whiskey and not bourbon or Tennessee whiskey? And I'm looking at the 1856 and it says 1856 premium whiskey.
Yeah, it needed to, because if you think about Tennessee whiskey, the conversation has changed immensely since Uncle Near's entered the picture and began winning every award that would usually go to a bourbon. Prior to that, the way that people were looking at Tennessee whiskey was not premium. And so the thing that was most important that we got across out of the gate was this is premium. And we thought that at some point we would shift it to saying premium Tennessee whiskey. But the more that we've been in it, the more we have found we don't need that label on there, because when you go overseas, we're bourbon. There is no such thing as Tennessee whiskey outside of the US. You go anywhere else in the world, it's bourbon. And so what we've been able to do by having premium whiskey on there and people seeing on the back that it's from the US, then they automatically know it's straight bourbon whiskey, which it is. But then if you're here and you're in the States and you care about the demographic, is it Kentucky? Is it Tennessee? Then it also appeals to you. So what we ended up doing, and it was a bit of a test as to whether or not it would work and whether or not we would have to be more specific. But the most important thing for us to get across was that our spirit was absolutely positively premium. The amount of money that we spend for the juice that is in that bottle is not, and I'm talking about everything from the process, not just the sourcing. I'm talking about every bit of what we do to get that final product. It's expensive. And so it was really, really important that people understood that we weren't just sourcing and tossing something in a bottle. We were spending a lot of time with it. We were aging it longer, and it was costly to do it. And so we wanted to make sure people knew first and foremost, before Tennessee, before bourbon, before anything else, any other label, that we were premium. That was what we wanted to get across. And I think we did pretty good with that.
Oh, yeah. And I want to just clarify one thing, because people will say that somebody's going to say, well, if it doesn't say Tennessee whiskey on it, then you guys didn't use the Lincoln County charcoal filtering process. So not only did you do it, but Nearest invented it, right? Yeah,
he didn't invent it, but he sure as hell perfected it. So there is not, the Lincoln County process is utilized, and we've got several different, whether it's 1884, 1820, 1870 is what we have in the UK with the British Bourbon Society, 1856. No matter what it is, we are never skipping Nearest Green's process. That Lincoln County process is in everything. But if you go down the list for straight bourbon whiskey And for Tennessee whiskey, we check every single box.
And just
For
to
both.
clarify, the Tennessee whiskey law that was passed in the legislature a few years ago basically enshrines the federal standards for bourbon. Only requirement on top of that is you got to charcoal filter it.
Correct.
So I just want to clarify that for everybody.
Yeah, if you look at the trade agreements that we have, it actually is literally in there as saying Tennessee whiskey, comma, a straight bourbon whiskey. And so again, overseas, people still recognize it as a straight bourbon whiskey because that's what it is. But yes, when Tennessee passed the law to distinguish Tennessee whiskey, the only distinguishment other than actually there isn't one because both has to use New American Oak barrels. The only difference is the Lincoln County process, and that is a filtration. It doesn't add anything, which is why it's still considered a straight bourbon whiskey. We're filtering out congeners and fusel oils and all of that red stuff that gives you headaches in the morning. We're pulling it all out, and that's really the only difference.
Graham Fraser in the UK asks, how much Uncle Nearest is sold by bottle and how much in bars? Have you had trouble getting into the... we know the on-premise has just been decimated over the last year. So what percentage do you get sold by the bottle in stores?
Yeah,
pretty much 100% these days.
We're really, really fortunate. We have a strong on-premise program. Even during the pandemic, we were one of the first brands, if not the first brand, to create cocktail to-go kits for the bars. And so while people were still trying to figure out, will it be legal? Is it legal? We gambled and believed that it would become legal in most states. And so we began creating these kits for the bars because we're like, they are literally being decimated right now. And so whatever we can do to help, we knew we weren't going to make any money on those because whatever profit we would make, we were now spending to provide them with the cocktail kits and the mixers and all the rest of that stuff. But because of that, I think that what we're seeing on this side of on-premise beginning to open back up, these bars have been incredibly supportive and loyal to us. And I think a part of that was when they were getting kicked, we were there to try to help them up, right? And doing everything in our power. And even when it got a little crazy and everyone was avoiding the on-premise, our team members would still go in and deliver them masks and make sure that they had whatever they needed. And so our on-premise is strong. That being said, we still are 80% off premise. And that has always been the plan. On premise introduces the brand and they make people fall in love with the brand, but then people still have to go out and buy it. And so we've been really good at making sure we're in a lot of physical locations. I think we may be up to close to 22,000 by now locations. And about 80% of those are going to be, not 80% of those, but 80% of the sales are going to be off-premise. They're going to be the retail stores.
I will tell you that this is a whiskey that I almost always have on my shelf. And as soon as I run out, I go out and get another one.
Thank you,
And it's
Mark.
one of the few whiskeys I spend my own money on.
Appreciate that.
For lack of a better term.
No, I appreciate that.
Question for you, Victoria. What happened the first time you saw a bottle of one of your whiskeys on the store shelf?
Oh my goodness. It's like the artist who hears his song for the first time on the radio. You kind of bubble up with some pride and you smile, embrace it. It's kind of undescribable how it feels, The first time I actually saw it in a bottle was in New Orleans. And I was gifted it by our senior VP in Fawn. And again, the emotional gal in me cried. But it still gets me, to tell the truth. People will say, "Oh, Victoria, I finally got a bottle of 1884," and to my surprise, your name is on the back of the bottle. And so, it still gets me.
And speaking of songs, Fawn, I can't let you get away without telling the story of the song that was in an Uncle Nearest TV commercial recently. That's got some family connections for you too. Yeah, that I did not know about until I read about it.
Really?
Yeah.
It's interesting because it was a song that was so unknown here, but an absolute cult classic in the UK. And the story behind it is super simple. Berry Gordy with Motown, Berry Gordy had a thing where he didn't really want his top producers being artists, for good reason, because they were cranking out songs like much more than we do now. Now someone will take weeks to do a song. Then you had 3 songs being produced on any given day, and you had to keep getting that music out. And that was just Berry Gordy's way with Motown. It's like, just keep flooding the streets with great music. And my father was one of the original hit makers. He's one of the only ones who maintained his publishing rights from day one. He never gave up his publishing rights. And so in the very beginning, he was actually an artist, which I didn't know this until after he passed away. Right before he passed away, actually. But he was an artist, and he had recorded exactly 1 song, and the song was great. But Berry, because of his you can produce or you can be an artist. And so he gave my dad that option, and my dad decided to be a writer and a producer. There's way more money in that. He's a smart man. And so he decided to be a writer and producer. And what he understood was that every single 45 was destroyed, with the exception of a few that were kept in the Motown vault and in Berry Gordy's personal collection. Well, lo and behold, one of these 45s shows up at a club in London, and a really, really popular DJ there, or right outside of London, but a really, really popular DJ there was a part of this, what they call the Northern Soul movement, which was essentially all these young white kids who were loving all of the Black music coming out of America, but specifically the most rare albums. And because this one had never been released in the US, it shot to the top of the charts, Northern Soul. I think it stayed at the top of the charts for something like 25 years. Imagine a single record remaining at the top of any chart for 25 years.
And even the Beatles didn't pull that off.
It's insane. But it was the song was never released in the US. And so when we are talking about publishing and all the rest of that after he passed away, and talking to the different attorneys, and they're looking at this and identifying the different songs, the Keep on Truckin', the Still Waters Run Deep, and all these other songs that are in his catalog. And this particular song was the song that made me dance. And so the first time it played on US airwaves was in that Uncle Nearest commercial. We brought it back home.
As a child of the 60s and 70s who grew up on Motown music, and then later working in Detroit radio and driving past the old Hitsville, USA studio on Grand Avenue, that's just a classic story. I mean, that's just...
I agree. So again, there's more history, right?
Yeah.
So we're all about history, and to add that piece to it, it's awesome.
Yeah. So your dad would have worked with the Funk Brothers, right?
He worked with everybody. He worked at anybody who was there. I mean, Smokey was one of the first ones there. He was there really early on. And my dad came in not too much longer after that. My dad was actually one of the ones that Berry asked to go out to LA and open the LA offices. It was really in Hollywood. So I was born at Hollywood Presbyterian. Nobody's actually from Hollywood except me. I actually am. But he had my dad go with 2 other guys to go to Hollywood and to open the Motown office there when right before the Detroit riots happened. Berry could see it was coming, and he had a feeling that Motown in Detroit would be destroyed. And so he was smart enough to make provision for the entire studio and everything to move to LA, and it did.
And for historians, or if you're not familiar with the reference to the Funk Brothers, that was the house band at the Motown studios with the legends like James Jamerson. And if you look at the documentary, look up the documentary Standing in the Shadows of Motown about the Funk Brothers. That is one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. You haven't seen that one?
No.
They brought back, they pulled the Funk Brothers back together, the surviving ones.
Yeah.
For a concert in that film.
Wow.
It's about 10, 15 years old.
Where do you find it?
I would imagine you might be able to find it on iTunes, maybe on YouTube.
Okay.
The soundtrack is Standing in the Shadows of Motown.
Motown. Okay.
But it's got artists like Chaka Khan in there. They bring back all of the original artists. Joan Osborne sings a couple of songs in there. Oh, geez, I'm whiffing on a few of these right now. But it is a soundtrack that if I'm driving and I have a long drive ahead of me, I will kick on that soundtrack and just go, because it's the music I grew up with. And highly recommended documentary. But let's see what else we've got here. Somebody asked a question earlier about what you think when you see Uncle Nearest bottles flipped on the open market. Somebody points out that, I'm trying to find it here, that they saw one that went for an astronomical amount, maybe one of those British Bourbon Society bottles. Yeah. Chris Radcliffe points out, much to the disappointment of the organizing club. What do you think when you see your bottles going for outrageous sums online?
Well, the thing that I do appreciate is that the British Bourbon Society, so their rule is that you cannot resell the bottles that you get through them. So someone actually broke the rules in order to do it, which I did not like at all. It went for over $800 before fees and shipping and taxes. But what I do love is that I then found out that the person who bought it is in the British Bourbon Society. They did not allow it to go outside. So even though someone broke the rule, someone else within the organization, not anyone who's like in it, but just a member of the British Bourbon Society saw that this is not right. And they went and bought it back. And I thought that was pretty cool, because my husband says to me, "Babe, should I bid on it?" I said, "Absolutely not." Absolutely not.
You got a little tiny sample to taste.
I listen, my view on the market there, I know it's a little different than especially the big guys who absolutely hate it. I think that Sazerac came out and said that they were really the ones who are fighting to get it killed overall on Facebook and all the rest of that. For us, for an independent brand that is wanting the world to really focus on the detail in our whiskey, to focus on the premium nature in it, for us, it's actually been a blessing, because there are people who otherwise would have never heard about the brand. But when you're seeing a bottle going for $800, you're Googling to figure out who the hell is this, right? And so I would venture to say for us, it has been a good thing. Now, you're talking about a brand that'll do 250,000 cases this year. We're not huge by any means. So ask me again when we're over the million case mark every year and ask me if I still look. But as of right now, we're still pretty small.
And Spirit Bomb Tabitha says she grew up with disco and house music. Where do you think that was inspired by? Where do you think that music came from?
Oh, we already know.
It came from Motown.
Yeah, we already know where it came from. I tell you what, I was really surprised at our distillery, we've brought in a lot of historians and researchers, not just on the whiskey side. We are tying together not only Tennessee whiskey, but Tennessee music. So that's country, bluegrass, Memphis blues, stacks. We're tying in the music, the history, the historical elements of music, and also Tennessee walking horses. But it was interesting on the music side, because I had no idea that country music was literally brought here by the instruments. All of them that are being used were brought here by those enslaved from West Africa. And when you look at the fiddle, which you almost never see African Americans playing, we brought that here. And I had no idea. I knew that Victoria's ancestor nearest was a fiddler, and his grandson Jesse was also a really well-known fiddler in the area. So I did know that, but I didn't realize that was something that began with our people. And so when the historians that are working on the Tennessee music side of things began giving me that history of country music, I've always loved country music. I all of a sudden had an even greater pride in my love for country music, knowing where it began.
Hey, at least you guys can't be blamed for the bagpipes.
We really don't have any claim to bagpipes. We're going to let
I'm kidding.
Along with the kilt.
Yes, please.
Questions from Graham Fraser. Any plans to experiment with Uncle Nearest in the future? Rye, single malt. What are you working on in terms of innovation?
Yeah, so we actually there is a recipe from Lynchburg that sits ironically in a safe in the bank that Jack Daniel founded, and it is a recipe that was sold to us by the grandson of one of Jack's descendants who used to make whiskey in the Alabama location. And it was interesting when I first got the recipe, because it was his grandmother's house burned down. It was literally right next door to Jack Daniel Distillery in Lynchburg. And only thing that survived was the safe. And this recipe was inside of the safe. But I didn't realize that during that time, they would actually change the recipe every season. I did not know that was a thing. And so the recipe would be similar, but how much rye and how much barley malt and how much corn malt would adjust depending on what time of the season. And so this particular recipe, ironically, called for corn malt. It was still I believe it was still 84% corn, but it was, I have to go back and look at it now because it's been a minute. But I believe that 8% of that was actually corn malt. And so it took us a really long time to find a maltster in the US who actually dealt with corn. Nobody wants to deal with corn because apparently it's the hardest one, which would explain why folks started taking it out of whiskey. It's really, really difficult. It's easy to mildew. And so, but we decided we wanted to make the original recipe. So back in 2017, we laid that recipe down alongside the mash bill that we currently use in our bottles. And then around year 2.5, we tasted the two of them. And they're both very, very good, but we actually preferred the one that did not use the corn malt. And so that was one of the things. We've played with a lot of different things that may never see the light of day, or it may just see it for collectors, because for us, innovation is important, but our whiskey has to be really good. When you're talking about our goal, which is to make sure that Nearest Green, hundreds of years from now, is not only still on the shelves, but it's continuing to grow as a brand, as a company. Everything we put out has to be really good. And so, yes, we're doing innovative things, but we're not going to just put it out because we spent the money to do it. It still has to be able to meet that standard of excellence. And the one with the corn malt, as of yet, now 4 years in, it doesn't. So ask me again at year 6 on that one. And we've got a few other things we're playing with. Rye, we are playing with rye, but the way that we're doing it is in a manner that has never been really in the industry. And we haven't been able to get it perfect. We actually, on that particular one.
I'm coming down. I got to try this.
Here's the interesting thing though on this one, Mark, and you'll love it. And I'll actually have to ask the distiller if I can tell you, because we're under a mutual NDA. But I actually every distiller here that we try to have do this particular project that has been on my heart to do since 2016. We've been trying, I kid you not, for more than 4 years to get this particular recipe perfect, to get this process perfect. And every single one that we worked with here couldn't get it. So I went to my personal favorite rye distiller in Kentucky, and I said, hey, will you work on this project with us? And he did it. And it's fantastic. But now we have to replicate it back at our distillery. and we were having a hard time.
Who was it?
Who'd you work with? I'm under mutual NDA, but all you have to do is ask around Kentucky, who's Fawn's favorite rye distiller? It won't be hard to figure out, because I talk about
every single one of them will be claiming it. Every single one of them will claim it. Yes, I'm Fawn's favorite distiller.
That's true.
I'm Fawn. Yep, I'm Fawn's favorite distiller. They're not going to tell that. They're not going to give that up.
I will tell you, he got it spot on, but his column still is smaller than ours. And so it does make a difference, the size still that you're using. So we have to try to recalibrate it to replicate what he was able to do in Kentucky here in Tennessee, and we've not been able to get it right. But I believe at some point this year, at the latest next year, we are going to finally have this perfected. And that's going to be an exciting project.
I can't wait, because I love what you guys have been doing all along. And I love the fact that you're pushing the envelope and trying new things and really trying to see what you can do to honor Nearest Green's legacy. And for those who aren't aware of it, I want you to tell us about the Nearest Green Foundation, that the proceeds, that the profits go to, some of the profits go to from each bottle to help send Nearest's descendants to college.
I'm going to let Victoria's the one who writes those every quarter. So I'm going to, or every semester. So I'm going to let her talk about this one.
Absolutely.
That's my baby. That is my baby. Yeah. For those who aren't aware, before Fawn launched Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey, she was already vested in Nearest Green and his descendants. She had already fallen in love with the story, with his family, and she had already put other initiatives were already in place. And one of them that I am particularly fond of is the Nearest Green Foundation. And our foundation, which I have the honor to oversee, we paid for tuition and books for all of the Nearest Green's descendants moving forward who have a desire to continue their education. We'll do that through their PhD if they have a desire to go that far. So there are no excuses. Education is very important, and
amen.
Fawn made sure that was one of the first things that she initiated. So I'm really proud of that.
How many do we have in this semester? Do you know?
We have 7.
We have 7 in this.
We have 7 in this semester.
And how many have graduated so far?
No, that's just who's in right now. So,
but I mean, how many have graduated since you started the foundation?
Yeah.
We've had. I'd have to go look, Mark. But I know we've had 2 to graduate with their masters. I think we've had maybe 5 to graduate altogether. We've got 1 that graduated. Dominique graduated, and she is pursuing her entrance into law school. So they're all doing well. They're doing quite well.
Yeah. Did she get in, Victoria?
No, she hasn't circled back yet to tell me. She was actually supposed to take the test week before last.
We were paying for the LSAT. Is that what we were doing? The tutoring and stuff? Okay, got it. Got it.
So in addition to tuition and books, we'll pay for assistance for tutoring, for like studying for the LSAT, and even tutoring while you're in undergrad if you need it. So every sale of Uncle Nearest is definitely important, because now it helps further the Nearest Green Foundation. Now, Fawn won't tell you this, but I will. She started the foundation. That was seed money from her own income. And so now...
Are you shitting me?
No, I'm not.
I never knew that. Pardon my language. I never knew that.
Because it didn't, I mean, it's...
She won't tell you that, Mark. So
I never knew that. Why didn't you tell me that before?
Well, she would never tell you that. And there were other things, like my grandmother's house. It has been vacant for years, but it's still there. Fawn makes sure that the lawn is kept up at my grandmother's house. And when she was doing the research looking for Nearest Green's grave, she realized there was no marker, no indication of the cemetery where all of my relatives are buried. And so now there is a beautiful entrance to the cemetery, and Fawn initiated that. And the townspeople in Lynchburg came and had a big celebration, and that too came out of her pocket. So
I knew about the celebration.
She's not going to tell you those things, but I do, and I do it not to just brag on Fawn. I want people to know the heart of this woman that I dearly love. So when we say we are more than whiskey, we are indeed more than whiskey.
Well, I knew about a little bit about the cemetery, but I didn't realize the money had come out of your own pocket, Fawn. And I'll give you a chance to respond here, only
No
because
comment.
this is
No
the first time I ever
comment.
heard you quote it, Fawn.
You know what? So here's the thing: is I always grew up, and I do believe this, that when it comes to donations and gifts, you don't let the right hand know what the left is doing. I've always believed that. We've never, my husband nor I, anything that we give to, we don't allow for people to put our names up on schools and for people to put us in program books. We just never have. And so for me, you're never going to hear me say about anything that we give. That's just not what we do. The only reason that we even talk about the Nearest Green Foundation is because in the very beginning, you had a lot of people who were trying to tear us down as a company. And I think that what ended up happening is those who were in the company began talking about it to push it back. But if it were up to me, we would have never talked about the Nearest Green Foundation, because you don't give for other people to know about it.
Right. And the reason, again, Mark, that I share it, because now that we are where we are, we don't have to do as much pushback when it comes to negativity. But I want people to know, really, Fawn's heart, more than anything, is that she has just the most genuine, generous spirit of anyone I know. And when we put out on social media and most things that we do with the hashtag "We Are More Than Whiskey," that is what comes to mind for me, is that when there's a need, Fawn will jump in and try to meet it. That's just who she is.
Mark, Victoria's trying to mess up my hard ass reputation. I work hard for people to look at me as a hard ass, and Victoria's out here really trying to mess that up for me.
Fawn, we know better. Fawn,
look, she's got a little edge to her. But,
you know it. You know it.
Look,
I know better, Fawn.
If anybody comes for me or anyone on our team, that hard ass will show up. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
It will come. It will bubble up real quick. But otherwise, she's what you see right there.
Yeah. Hey, I love you guys as a brand, as people, and I have all the respect in the world for you. And even more so after putting up with this and putting up with me for the last hour and 15 minutes on this, and Fawn getting embarrassed and everything about all this. And as Tabitha points out, in the UK, first WhiskyCast where I've gotten really emotional.
Aww.
Well, I'll tell you what. Yeah, I mean, because let's face it, I have jokingly referred to you as Hurricane Fawn, the force of nature, because you are a force of nature. I mean, I have never seen anybody just get so much more done by sheer will and determination and just making things happen than you.
Absolutely.
And
I agree, Mark.
More
agree.
power to you, Fawn.
Well, I can raise my glass to that. I'm drinking on the job, Fawn.
Oh, as you should.
So
yeah, Fawn, what the hell are you doing, Fawn?
Well,
come on.
Here's the
this
thing.
This is the thing, Mark. I say all the time. We run at an accelerated pace every single day. But everything that we do, it starts at the top with Fawn. And you can trust and believe that while we're going 100 miles an hour, she's already thought it through before she brought it to us. So it's accelerated, but it has been well thought out. And all we have to do is execute it.
And y'all executed excellent. And the only reason I'm not drinking, although I will cheers with y'all, the only reason I'm not drinking is I have another interview that starts fairly soon. So
I'm done.
I only drink in my last interview of any given day is the very last one. Prior to that, I won't drink. But Mark, I do want to say this, because I remember when we first came into the industry, and we had a lot of people who, not an overwhelming amount, but we had a good number of people that would bash us, and critics, not on the whiskey, just in general, for whatever reason. And you were one of the very first in the media to support us within the industry. We had obviously a lot of support from media outside of the industry, but you were one of the very first to look at us and to support us on the merits, and for it not to be about personality or emotion, or this person is these outsiders are coming in and they're not following the rules, which we didn't and we won't. And you have supported that from day one, and we're really appreciative of that.
Absolutely.
Well,
absolutely.
Thank you, Fawn, because I can see the sincerity and the genuineness of what you guys are trying to do, and I respect it completely. And I it's easy to be cynical in this business as a journalist, but I can't be cynical when I hear what you guys are doing, and that's what makes me happy as a journalist, is to be able to share stories like this. As Tabitha says, my face aches because I've been grinning throughout this stream. I've loved this tonight. What an amazingly inspirational pair of women.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
With that,
cheers,
Victoria Eady-Butler. Hey, when the Icons of Whiskey Global Awards were announced later this month, you've got stiff competition, but I really hope to hear your name called.
Thank
the
you.
global
I
icon.
appreciate that. I really do. I really appreciate that. I do.
And Fawn, thank you as always. And as we'll leave it on this one, as Bill Ricker points out, bagpipes win stereo wars.
Well, cheers
Leave
to
it
that.
to Bill Ricker. Cheers
Thank
to that,
you,
guys.
Mark. Love
Have
you,
a great
Thank you,
weekend,
guys.
Mark. Bye, Fawn.
You too. Bye. We'll talk to you all later on. Let me say goodbye to everybody here for a split second. Next time around, we'll have our writers roundtable that we haven't done in a while. Becky Paskin, Udo Sontag, and Johnny McCormick will join us from Whiskey Advocate magazine, and Becky from ourwhiskey.com. Udo has the new biography of the memoir, rather, of Jim McEwen coming out, and he told me in a tasting a couple of days ago that while it will be in German originally, there will be an English language version coming out. Don't forget to join us for the podcast this weekend. We will announce March's Whiskey Club of the Month, and we'll hear from Tosh McGill about the latest in New Zealand whiskey as well. That's it, guys. We've had a great night. Thank you for joining us, and have a great weekend. Stay safe, wear your masks, and sláinte mhath.